Press start to play.
Hey all, so today we're going to be refurbishing a Nintendo 64. I've been doing a lot of Nintendo 64 stuff on this channel, so I figured I'd include this. I've had people ask me how I do this, so I figured I'd make a video about it. Especially my friends who come in and play my Nintendo 64. So here we are in my music studio. We're going to be going through that back door there to do the refurb, but first I want to show you something from my bench at home. This was my childhood Nintendo 64. We had 3 cats. I never cleaned the thing. I think maybe my dad vacuumed it out once or twice, but as you can see, it was not pretty. But I got it to work, and all I had to do was take it apart and put it back together again, clean it all up. Especially the card reader is usually an issue. So here we're looking at a refurb I already did, and it's not rocket science, it's pretty easy. I've graduated to also fixing the boards as well. Incidentally, the lighting will get better later on in this video, my apologies. So I removed the feet. You have to have a certain type of screwdriver for it, or I just bought the bits so I could put them in my screwdriver that just takes the bits. But you can buy these things that will unscrew these particular safety screws for peanuts on eBay. Here I'm just showing you how to take apart the power. You have to squeeze these 2 pieces on the end. And when we refurb our other unit, we're going to see that it's not always that simple. So also with the power button, it's obviously very important that it be aligned with the toggle switch. Here I'm shunning myself because I left the jumper pack in, and yeah, that was not good. I could have broken the top, I could have busted the jumper pad, I could have scratched something, so yeah, not a good idea. So the entire mechanics of this thing aren't really that advanced. I mean, we're talking about technology from 1997, which unfortunately was years back. Actually, I think 1996 was when this thing came out. So here I'm just kind of showing you some of the basic stuff. Essentially, this is what the heatsink looks like. You can see I didn't put every screw back in. That's because in my philosophy, you don't need every screw, and it's handy to keep a few so that way the next unit you do, you can have some spares. For instance, on the thing that I'm going to refurbish in this video, the unit I refurbish here, I wind up losing some feet screws, but thankfully I had some extras. So here I'm just showing you need to get that toggle switch and the power switch in the exact same position. If you're just a little hair off, then you kind of have to push the power switch too hard. And keep in mind, I'm reselling these units, so that's why I'm a little bit more meticulous. When I did my own, it was just about making it work. Here you can see I'm using a music stand, which isn't ideal, but yeah, I just wanted to do this in my studio. This is the unit I'm refurbing. It ain't pretty, as you can see. I do not get why people can't even just clean off the top, make some sort of an effort, you know? It's just nuts to me. Even the Nintendo logo, it has dust and crap in it. And that's a typical thing that you'll run into with not just this, but with controllers and everything else. Dust always finds a way to get into electronics. I've also been doing Sega Game Gears, and it's the same thing. I've found, believe it or not, I've found hairballs in them too. So here, I'm gonna go through and I'm just undoing the so-called safety screws here. Usually, when something hasn't been opened, you'll know because the screws are just really hard to get out. And that's been the case with basically every unit I've ever bought off the internet. Now this unit I bought off of Goodwill for $30. It came with the original manufacturer's AV cables, and it also came with an adapter. So when I resell them, because I'm interested in keeping as much OEM stuff as I can, I wind up buying the remake adapters, the third-party adapters, and the third-party AV cables. And the thing is also because the third-party cables and adapters are made, you know, at least after the year 2010 or whatever, they work a little bit better. The adapters for the N64, the OEMs, are really heavy, they're really bulky, but the new ones that they make are very, very simple. Very light, and they work really well. So here, somebody even left the sticker, the warning sticker, on the, what is that called? The jumper pack. And I couldn't find my jumper pack tool, so I just wound up using a pair of scissors here. If you're not going to be gentle, don't use metal on plastic, okay? As you can see, I didn't hurt this thing at all when I used the scissors, but that's because I did it gingerly. I wasn't forcing it, I was just using a very, very small amount of force. That's the key. So you're going to want to just get the tool that Nintendo makes, just makes it easier. Here, I'm just taking this guy apart, and you can see what the factory build looks like. This is a piece that fell off. I heard something rattling around as I was taking it apart, and we're gonna have to fix that because that's something that a screw goes into. So here you can see I'm showing you the reset button, the controller inputs, the left side is your power toggle. Nothing fancy schmancy, it's pretty straightforward. So right now we don't need the top, and I stupidly put it on the floor where I could step on it or something. That was dumb. But, you know, c'est la vie. So I found using a Japanese screwdriver is best, and that's because it meets Japanese industrial standards. This one happens to be a Toyota screwdriver that I found in my basement. Here, I'm just taking apart the heat sinks. Again, not rocket science. The nice thing too is the screws are very simple to segregate. In some cases, they're not just different lengths, but even different colors. So it made it easier for everybody, not just the person who first put this together, but also me, the guy who's refurbing it, what, 30 years later almost? So here, this is the top part of what I call the heatsink sandwich. So you have that, and then there's the heatsink sandwich underneath it. You can also see the AV in-out and the power in-out there. So here, what I do now is I just lift the board out of the housing. The housing is the easier thing to clean. And there I'm just showing you a piece of where the adapter basically goes in. It's basically just a dust cover for the adapter hole. The top one, I tend to have a little bit of trouble putting it all back together, so I like to take it off as intact as possible. So now we're just looking at the naked board. We got our different processors there, different chips. So they too have heat sinks on them. There's really no need to clean them because they're well protected underneath the heatsink sandwich. And now here we're seeing the bottom of the heatsink sandwich. So generally what I do at this point is I inspect stuff. So you can see, like, dude, all this dust around that switch, so that's gonna have to be fixed. I don't really take this apart. Basically, I just use canned air for such things. But if you wanted to, you could unsolder the thing and, you know, really give it a good clean. So I'm also looking at the board to see if any of the soldering connections are screwy. A big thing are the soldering connections to the controller ports. In here, I'm just looking at all the chips and jazz in here, just seeing if I see anything obvious like carbon. I'm also testing the heat sinks to see if they float. Sometimes you have to put a little bit more adhesive on them. So here you're looking at the card reader, which in my experience is the biggest thing. So first I like to just go around and clean the dust and crap out of the controller ports. It's pretty important because your controllers won't work if there's dust and crap in there, right? So here I'm just using some canned air, nothing fancy. I also wind up just using some canned air around the board itself. And here I'm going to take out what I call the card reader. It just reads the ROM card. And it's nice, it's not soldered into the board, so it's easy to clean. So I checked to make sure that I have all the right pins, that I didn't, lose one in the pullout. And I'm looking inside of it to see if there's any hair or anything. And there wasn't anything visible at the time. But later on in this video, I picked it up and I saw some hairs coming out of it. So you should definitely use canned air on it. You can also see that the contacts here need to be clean. I generally do that with some really high percentage isopropyl alcohol. In this case, I always use 91% at least. So usually I'll go over this with a toothbrush. Alas, I could not find the toothbrush, so I wound up just using a rag. And I'm not really soaking this thing. I'm just trying to make sure that all the electrical connections just don't have dust on them. It's pretty basic. And of course your canned air is going to help that, but just a wipe down will too. So now we're going over to the sink, and I'm using lukewarm water here, and I'm just making a little bath to put these parts in. Incidentally, I forgot these, I think that they help disperse heat, that they're part of the heat sinks. That's the only thing that I can think they're for. And now I'm going through the top one and I'm showing you in a better setting how to take the power and the reset button off. Now this one, this button was just so ridiculously stubborn. So I wound up having to use a screwdriver to pry the sides a little bit more and then push it through. Again, you do not want to normally use metal on plastic because it can damage it. Here I was being very careful so I didn't get a scratch or anything. Now the power button rather is a little bit easier because you just gotta push it out. The reset button is harder because they use different switch styles. One is a toggle, the other is just a press down switch. Now here we have basically the card reader cover. It's just a dust cover, and I'm just gonna take this guy off. Just got to take those two screws out. Putting the doors back is probably one of the harder things when you're refurbing these, and that's not that hard. So yeah, here you're just looking at the gook in it, and then you're gonna watch me clean said gook. Right? So I'm just using a rag and dish soap, and I've let this thing sit for a little while. I'm just basically going over it. This is really phase one of the outer cleaning, because depending on how dirty it is, you may wind up needing to use isopropyl alcohol, or even WD-40 is a good cleaner too. But I start with water, then alcohol, then WD-40. So here you can see this looks a heck of a lot better, right? Already there's less dust and jazz in it. And now, for the excuse for grown men to play with water, I'm just agitating it a little bit, moving the water around to get into those nooks and crannies. And then after that, I am showing you the stickers here, and you don't really have to worry about the stickers coming off unless you use isopropyl alcohol on them, or you're soaking it for too long. Here, I just soaked it for maybe 5 minutes. Now I go ahead and I rinse it all out. It's easier with a kitchen sink. This is my bathroom sink in the studio. It's not very powerful, but it gets the job done. And essentially, you can air it out for a few hours. You can decide to do it for a day. I like to do it for a day and then come back to it just to be sure that all the water has evaporated. There I was cleaning the door. And now I have to fix this broken piece, which is pretty simple. Thankfully, it was a clean break. So first, I'm going through, and this is my more meticulous cleaning. I'm using a Q-tip to just get all the dust and crap out of there. So here's my fix. I just put some contact cement between the two broken pieces, and then I also just put some contact cement around it. Let it sit for a day, and that was the end of that. So we'll see if it holds when I put the screw back in. So I never put WD-40 directly on anything other than a rag. And I really love this can because it gets into nooks and crannies. It's nice. And here I'm just going through and doing some choice spots on the inside. The outside I'm gonna do the entire piece of, really. So this is me just, again, going into nooks and crannies, just getting some of the dust and grime off of the thing. This Q-tip has some isopropyl alcohol on it. What I'm pointing to is unfortunately a ding on the housing. Now you could fix that. You would have to sand it down and then repaint it. But nobody's ever had complaints about slight dings. And I even told one person the unit I was gonna sell them had a ding, and he was like, yeah, I don't care, I just want to play the games. So here I'm putting in the door, which, like I said, is one of the harder things to do. It's all about spring placement. And of course, you just have to kind of slam it in all at once. There's no way to secure the doors. You just kind of hope for the best. But yeah, this I think is the hardest thing to do on the unit, which is good because there's not that much to do. So here you can see I put limited screws in there because the heatsink isn't floating, and I just make sure that the heatsink doesn't float, and then I know that I have enough screws in there. We don't need to put every single screw back in. So now we're going through our tests. So this is my little Nintendo 64 shrine in my back room at my studio. I fix other stuff back here, like guitars and such. Here you can see I'm paranoid about that power button having dust in it, so I just keep cleaning it. I'm just inserting my standard jumper pack. This wasn't the one that came with it. Doesn't really matter, they're all the same. In electricity, a jumper is just a thing that carries electricity, basically. So, yeah. So now, we're gonna go ahead and I'm hooking up my AV cables and everything. You notice I don't have the top on because if I have to fix something or whatever, I won't have to take the top back off. And we're gonna play some Mario Kart. I like to test with Mario Kart because it's a 4-player game. So, I'm gonna hook up 4 of my controllers here. Right, okay. And of course, in the act of doing this, I find that little piece that takes the jumper pack out. So now, I'm just going to test and make sure that all the controller ports work, and then I do a little stress test on it. So, this is player 1, all I'm doing is hitting start, and just making sure that each controller is being recognized. So start B on 1, start B on 2, start B on 3, and so on. So now, essentially, I like to just sit down, or in this case I'm standing up, I believe. I like to sit down and just play a little bit of the game and just make sure that the Nintendo 64 is intact, that nothing's going to blow up on me. I've actually had that happen. I've had one work and then the processors just poop out. At that point, you have to solder new stuff onto the board, which isn't that fun, but it's not that hard. So here, we're doing more detailed work. We're dealing with our power and reset button. And as you can see, grime galore, right? Just craziness. So what I like to do is less water, more soap. So here I've created a little puddle of soap in the sink for myself. And I just put a splash of water on the Q-tip. And now I'm going to go into those nooks and crannies of the power and reset buttons along all of it, just the entire thing, and just basically scrubbing, you know. And the nice part is the soap really gets into the, well, it's not embossed, but into the lettering. I guess it's engraved, or I don't know what you would call that on plastic if that's still engraving. But you can see I got a lot of gunk off there. And Dawn is a really good thing to use, or dish soap is really good to use for a lot of applications, because it's meant to take oil out of things, and a lot of what's on these units is hand oil. And that will help the grime and the dirt just settle in more. Even if you have oil stains like on a car or something, you can take them out with dish soap. It's amazing. Frequently, I get grease because I eat greasy food. I get grease on my clothing, and I just walk into the bathroom here, put a little bit of Dawn on it, and that's the end of that. Use some cold water so the stain doesn't set in. I know I sound like a cleaning freak, but I'm not, believe it or not. I just know how to get oil stains and how to clean stuff. I don't do it enough in my own life. So here I'm just going through, and then I dry it, and as you can see, it looks much better. Now I put a little puddle of WD-40 in there, and now I'm just going over it with the WD-40. I'm gonna dry it off. And that just gets the residual. Also, it makes it a lot shinier and prettier too. Okay, so you can see that I'm just making sure that that thing that I fixed isn't moving, and I didn't put a boatload of screws back into the heat sinks, but I put enough so that way it didn't float. So now I'm putting back on my top, and I need to be sure, extra sure, that my power button and my reset button align perfectly. Reset button, not as much of an issue because it's not a toggle. Power button is. So I'm just making sure that my toggle is in the exact same position as far back as possible. So now I just put the reset button back in and make sure that the toggle is working the way, it feels the way it needs to feel. And of course, we go back and put our safety screws in. And this is what this thing looks like. So I've cleaned it, I've tested it, and it's ready to roll. So if you have an old dusty unit at home, follow this. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.